Hello and welcome to another Developer Essentials. So this time around, we're going to be taking a look at something called animation curves and also something called color gradients. So these are two really sort of powerful tools that we've got access to in Unity that can make it really easy to do things where we're controlling how something's moving or changing over time and control sort of the appearance of things there. So let's dive in and take a look. So what I've got set up is just an initial scene here where we've got a sphere over our ground plane, and I've already gone ahead and set up a couple of scripts here. So one for the animation curve and then one for the color gradient side of things. So animation curves allow us to control how something can move between different values usually. So I want to actually use the animation curve to control how this sphere moves. And in particular, what I want to be doing with this is I want to make it so that the sphere is going to bounce up and down, but I want to control that vertical movement through the animation curve because this will allow me to actually control it visually. I can draw out the path that it takes. So let's get set up for this. So first thing, animation curves are actually a variable type. So we can put in animation curve, and then I'm going to call this vertical movement. So with this, we draw the path that it's taking. Now, just with setting that alone, I'm going to go and show you how the editor for this looks. So it'll appear here in the inspector, and we can click on this. If I bring this over here and expand it, we can actually see we've got a few presets here of different curves, and we can actually add in our own presets. Now, if we take a look at these, we've got one where it's a flat curve. We have a linear one. We have ones where it ramps up. Ones where it is a sort of slower ramp at the end, and then an S-curve. So we've got a bunch of built-in ones already in this. And you'll notice that all of these ones, they default to the minimum value is 0. So our vertical axis here is the output. So the output ranges from 0 to 1, and the input ranges from 0 to 1. Now, we're not constrained to that. We can absolutely make an animation curve that has values that go, its output value goes above or below 1. We can make ones where the input value goes outside of that 0 to 1 range. So it doesn't really matter what values we use there. 0 to 1 is very commonly used just because 0 to 1 works so well with all things like scaling and doing linear interpolation. So you'll generally see 0 to 1 ranges used for this. And in most cases, I would actually use a 0 to 1 range just because that ease of being able to scale it. And it means that if I want to change the maximum values, then I don't need to come in and adjust the animation curve. I can adjust a separate variable. So what I'm going to do is, so we want this it's controlling the vertical movement. So we need to control the time over which that happens. Now again, that animation curve, I could reauthor that. So, okay, well the animation curve, it's now a 5-second one or a 10-second one or a 2-second. So I could adjust the animation curve to control that. But again, that means that I'm having to change the curve every time I want to change the duration, which is not ideal. So what I would normally do is I would then have a float that is movement duration, and let's make that 15 seconds. And similarly, I would also have a field that controls the maximum amount of movements, or the maximum displacement is another term we could use for that. And I'm going to say the maximum displacement is 1. So, okay, let's implement this. Let's make this work. Now, the first thing, I know I need to store my initial position. That is a given. So initial position, transform position. I know I'm also going to need to keep track of the time. So current time. So, okay, then in update, what I would be doing is current time, and I want to add time.delta time to that. Now, I want this to be able to loop around. So there's, in previous videos, you might have seen what I've done there is I've done an if check for doing that. Well, for something like this, where it's a case of I just want to continually cycle, so I want to go from 0 to 15 and then back down, so I just want that continual cycling. What I can do is I could say current time is equal to mathf repeat. So it will loop this value t and then movement duration. Just a really handy way of actually doing this. Update the current time. So then to work out the displacement, what I do, so with animation curves, the way we use them is we say vertical movement, so the name of the variable, dot evaluate. And then we give it time. So this is the horizontal axis. So if I go back to here, the time value is corresponding to this horizontal axis. Because what the animation curve does is we feed it our time value, and then it says, okay, well, so at 0.5, it finds where that curve is, what its y value is at that particular time value. And then that's what it returns back. So in this case, because I'm using a 0 to 1 range, I need to turn my current time into a 0 to 1 value. Which if I just do current time divided by my movement duration, that will give me that value. Then my displacement is equal to my vertical movement, the output of that, which I know that has to be a 0 to 1 value because of how I've built the curve, multiplied by max displacement. And then I can just set our position. That's going to be our initial position plus vector 3 up times by displacement. So calculate and apply the displacement. So that looks good. Let's test this out, because this should mean over the course of 15 seconds, we see our sphere here move. So we'll run this, and then we'll look at see the kinds of things we can do with our animation curve. So we can see it's moving up fairly slowly because this is happening over the 15 seconds. Now I'm going to actually make this more like 5, so we can see that happening a little bit faster. So that's good. So that's running. So I'm actually going to create a couple of copies of this sphere so that we can see the different sort of behaviors we can actually get with this. Middle. So I'll set up different animation curves for each of these. So I believe, nope, not Z, X, cool. So let's get these set up. And what I'm going to do is, so the left one, I'm going to set that to be a linear. Middle, I'm going to leave as the S curve. And then right, I'm going to change to this more exponential one. So they'll all end up at the same endpoint, but they'll do that using different curves. And we can see that difference in behavior there. And so they go up, and then they snap back down, which is intentional. So we get quite different visuals for the behavior there, and we can start to really mess with this. Because this curve, we're not constrained to just using these presets. We can add in extra points. You know, for example, say I want this to be at 1 at the midpoint in the time. So I can adjust my different values here. So we've got do that. What did that do? 0 and 1. So you need to be careful when you are editing the ones, because you can easily do like I did there, where I inadvertently delete one of the points by making its time value the same as another one. So it is something you want to watch for when you're editing these. But you can right click on a point and change it. You also see when I click on a point here, I have these little faint lines here that allow me to change the gradient. So this will actually now go up and then down. So it'll complete a full cycle in that time. So let's let this run. And we should see this one moves up quite quickly and then back down. So that gives us a much sort of smoother, continuous set of movement. But we can do a lot more changes than this. So we can take this and, well, I want to add in another point here. So the way I usually work this with adding in points is I work out roughly the x value, so the input where I want to set it. So in this case, about 0.25. Then I just double click on the curve at that point. And you'll see it adds in another key. And then I can change its sort of movement. And if I added another one over here, then I could do similar. So we're going to get this is going to bounce up and down multiple times now. So if we run that, we'll be able to see the behavior. So we can see. So really easy to control this. So the thing that I like about animation curves and using them for controlling things like how movement or in general how anything is changing is it lets you focus on the sort of visual that you're going for there. Are you wanting it to change rapidly? Are you wanting it to change slowly? Are you wanting it to have sort of an ease in or ease out on that changing? It allows you to really carefully control that. And we can also, with these points, if we right click on them, we've got things like delete and we've seen edit. So usually I'll manually place them just by dragging around the point, and then I usually tweak the points afterwards just to have them hitting the exact time and value that I'm after for it. So we can right click to edit. We can also right click and delete particular ones. So like if this, let's say I want to delete this one, so we can do that. And then we also have control over our tangents. So the left tangent is the line to the left of the point. Right tangent is the line to the right of the point. And we have these different options in terms of how they actually vary between them. So at the moment, it's using free smooth. So it's trying to have it be a smooth curve between them. But we can also do things like, well, the right one, I want to make that linear. So it's going to start off linear, but it's blending into something that is not. So we have to then change this one's left tangent to linear. So that lets us have a straight line. We also have other options here in terms of, we can have constant values, which are going to largely be exactly the same as the linear one in this case. But with this, you can see if I drag this, because the right side one is set to linear, it holds this particular value. That's the advantage of having it be a constant one. And then I can try other ones with this. So the weighting is going to be controlling how much of this value versus this one. So it lets us easily sort of control. And we can get really sharp changes. So it's possible in our animation curves to actually have step changes like this. That's very doable in them and fully supported. It's a very, very sort of fully featured in terms of the capabilities. And if we mess up with the points, we can undo like we did there. We can also, these tangents, we can actually adjust them individually. So if I change this to broken, then I can change the one on the left separate from the one on the right. So it gives me a lot of control over it. And if I decide, well, I really like this curve, I want to apply this to something else, I can click on it here, go copy, pick another one, and I can go paste. So we can copy and paste those values so that we can easily map that across to other particular ones, but it just gives us a way of really carefully controlling the particular values here. And you might also be wondering, well, what happens when we go outside of the range? Because at the moment, I'm ensuring this is constrained to be between 0 and 1. What if I go outside of that range? So, easy way for me to do that is if I just change this to current time plus time.delta time, and comment out the repeat. So this will now be able to reach movement duration and go beyond that. So we'll see what happens when we go over the time value that we've got as our input there. So we'll see it's fine. It just runs and then it holds. So it's going to stop at whatever the previous value is. So it's something where it's not going to typically cause huge issues if we provide an input that's out of the range. What it will do is it will find the nearest point on the animation curve to that particular one, and that will be the value that it uses. So that means in the case of this one, if we provided a negative value, it would be 0. If we provided a value above 1, then it would also be 0. So it keeps it constrained within that. So if we do accidentally have an issue where it can go slightly over it, it's not going to cause us any problems or run into any issues with it, which is excellent. So that's the key things with animation curves. And we can also, if we have a look at the vertical movement, we actually do have the ability, if we wanted to add keys in via code. And we can also do things like moving and removing keys. So if we needed to, that is actually something that we can do. It's not a commonly needed thing. I've only needed to do that once, and where I needed to do that was in a game where the user was actually kind of drawing an animation curve. They drew a curve, and so what I did was I took the points that they drew, added those in as keys, and then I was able to evaluate that animation curve for, in my case, it was for controlling audio. So we can very easily add in keys. The interface for that is quite straightforward. We give it the time and the value. So it's a really straightforward system to be working with. So animation curves are one of those things that again, any variation between things. So although it's called an animation curve, that's, it's not specifically just for, animations where you're looking at something like parts of a character moving, things like that. Anytime you're looking at having something vary over time, animation curves should always be something that you consider. So that could be something moving, that could be a color change, it could be a volume change, anything like of that where you've got variation, you want to control how it varies. Think of an animation curve as a potential option there. As I said, I would always recommend with animation curves, keeping the input value between 0 and 1 and keeping the output value between 0 and 1 so that you can do the scaling independently. That tends to mean that you're doing a lot less editing of the animation curve, and it means the animation curves focus on the appearance, and then you control duration scale outside of that. Now, you can absolutely still have those things baked into the animation curve if you want, but I usually go for not doing that. So animation curves, super useful. Color gradients kind of form a similar purpose. And so we're going to take a look at those. So first thing I'm going to need to be doing here is I want to actually be controlling some of the properties on this particular texture, on the material. So the spheres already have their own material added to them. So let's make sure they've all got that. So we'll set this up. And what we're wanting to do is, if I select the sphere here, our albedo color here, I want to be able to control that using a color gradient. And so I need to know the variable for that. So the easiest way as always to find that is I go to debug. I can then take a look at my properties. And so underscore color is the one that I want. So for varying the color on this, I'm going to use a material property block. So material property block, prop block. And because I'm putting this on something where it has to have that mesh renderer, just for safety, I'm also going to use a require component, mesh renderer, linked.mr, and just retrieve this. So linked.mr equal to, we're just going to retrieve our mesh renderer. Property block is a new material property block. So we just get that all set up, so we're ready to go with this. So then let's set up our gradient. So we have color gradient is so it's referred to just as gradient. And then I can change this to albedo tint. So if I save that, and then we go and take a look at what we have now on the different spheres, you can see we have this albedo tint, and when we click on it, we see this editor, which if you haven't changed any sort of color gradients in Unity before, you may not have seen this editor. So we have two sets of controls here. We have these lower set of controls and these upper ones. The upper set of controls allow us to control how the alpha, the transparency, is changing throughout this gradient. The lower set allow us to control the specific color that's there. And what we can do is we can just click at any point and add in other colors. And we can see visually what the gradient looks like. We can just chuck in other ones here. So this, maybe it's green at that point, and maybe at this point, let's go for blue. So we can visually see what these look like. We can drag these around, and that changes where this particular color is being applied. We can manually set these. So we can place it roughly where we want and then manually go in and tweak these. We can also save these as presets. And then we can control the alpha here. And we also have these options in terms of the mode. So with fixed, it's just a hard cut. It's now this color, it's now this color, it's now this color. Whereas blend, it tries to do a smooth transition between the particular colors. And similarly, the alpha, as we can see, we could have just 2 points. We can control the alpha entirely separately from the color. So it doesn't need to have a one-to-one match with where these key points are. And we can also, if we've selected one, which the selection, you might be able to see just a really faint little outline around the marker here. When we have one selected, we can just hit delete to remove it. So that gives us our color gradient. And similar with the animation curves, I can copy that, and then I can paste that over in these other ones. So I'm going to change this one so that its starting color fades in and out from black. And then the middle one, I'm going to change these so it is magenta. So just so we see a bit of variation between the particular ones. So really quick and easy for setting these up. And then how these work is actually quite similar to our animation curves. They have a 0 to 1 value. So I need a duration again. So it's field duration, which let's say it changes over 5 seconds again. Again, have a current time. So our current time, we use the mathf repeat. Current time plus time.delta duration. Time. Now to work out the color, what we do is we say, hey, albedo tint, evaluate. So very similar to the animation curve in that way. And again, has a 0 to 1 value into it. So 0 corresponds to the color that's on the far left, 1 the color that's on the far right. So we would have current time divided by duration. And this just gives us back our new color, which we can then set. So our property block, set color, do this value, and then we just need to apply that. Set the property block. Excellent. So retrieve and apply the color. So you could use this for things like if you wanted to indicate, color code based upon health values, stuff like that. So you can see we just get really smooth color transitions there that we can fully customize with our controls here. And we can kind of do a little bit more with this in that, well, we know our albedo tend to our gradients take in a 0 to 1 value. Let's chuck in an animation curve. Let's chain these together. So color curve. And then what we would do is we would have color progress is equal to color curve evaluate. And then we use a current time divided by duration from that. And we feed that value in. So what this does now is rather than that color change happening linearly, which it was, so it was a smooth linear movement between the values, now we can control the rate that this will happen at. So I can I'm going to actually make it the movement curve. I'm just going to apply that for each of them. Which in particular for this middle one is going to be quite interesting. But this should mean we see for the middle one, its color is cycling up and down a lot. And then we have the same one for that. So we can paste that in. Excellent. So let's run that. And what we should see is now, rather than changing linearly, so these ones changes really rapidly. It's sort of flashing. Whereas this one, it's changing quite slowly in time with the movement. So this process where we take sort of the output from one curve and then we chain it into another curve or a gradient is a really handy process, because otherwise our gradient change, it was just purely linear, but we might not want to do that. We might want to have it that it is following a bit of a more controlled transition. So color gradients, I don't use them a huge amount, but they are super handy for things like, okay, well, this character or creature or object's health is changing. I can use this for tinting the parts of that creature or health bars or text. So that gives you an easy thing that you could set up. So for example, I could have set this up. So, okay, 0 is going to correspond to no health. So we can make that be, I think red is going to be suitable for that. And then full health might be bright green. And then what that means is now as this character's health changed, we would see whatever you were using this gradient on change from being a bright green to orange and then red. And we could actually customize this. So we might want to have specific sort of step changes at particular values. So if we add these in, this is the advantage of adding these keys in once you've set sort of the start and end points, is they take on whatever the value was at that stage. And then we can tweak that. So I might want it that at this stage, when it goes from the green, the 75 to below 75, I might want to just push that a little bit sooner over to the yellow. So it's a bit more of a rapid change. And I might also want then here, this to be pushing towards sort of an orangey color a lot sooner. And then red, I might want to have that kick in again even sooner. So we can control sort of when those color changes happen. And now we've got a bit more of an even sort of indicator of, okay, well, as soon as it goes yellow, it's below 75. If it goes orange, it's below 50. If it goes red, then it's below 25. So really, really easy way of actually customizing this. If we want to just very, sort of strict step changes, we could switch this over to fixed. But I think blend would work quite well for this. And if I change this to back to one of our curves, actually, yeah, let's go with an S curve for this. So what we'll see is it will start at low health, the one on the right, and then it goes up to full health. And I'll make that so it corresponds with this, just because that way then sort of feels a little bit more like it fits. So we can just see nice, really smooth color changes there. Very, very easy to tell sort of what's happening with it. We can also, similar to the animation curves, our gradients, we can actually adjust the keys in there. Now we can retrieve things like our alpha or color keys separately. We can change that mode. And for setting the key, so it doesn't have the same sort of interface where we can go and add a key in manually. It's a thing where we have to do a set key. So we apply an entire block of keys to it in one go. So slightly different process for working with it, but still allows us to get there and change and modify the particular ones in there. So that's the key stuff with animation curves and color gradients. They're incredibly useful. I highly recommend making use of them, in particular animation curves. As I said, anytime you've got stuff where you're wanting something to vary over time, consider whether an animation curve is going to be the option there for it. Especially if you're dealing with things where there's movement or something that's visual or something that you can hear, any of those ones. But you can also use it for stuff beyond that. So I've used it for things like the difficulty sort of scaling over time. So things where I've wanted stuff to become more difficult, I've set up an animation curve where the input is the sort of percentage through the typical playtime, and the output is a scale factor that then is used for controlling the AIs and other things to raise the difficulty. So you can use it for visual things, but also for ones that are more sort of design and gameplay, sort of behind the scenes stuff there, where you've got parameters changing over time. So dive in and experiment with them. See the kinds of things that you can be creating there. Experiment with different types of curves as well. The different sort of appearances there that you can have to see the kinds of effects that you can create. And yeah, dive in, see what you can do. Thanks, folks. If you're looking for the code for the project, then in the description below, you'll find a link to the GitHub. And on the GitHub, I've got the code for this project and for all of the other projects there freely available. And if you have found the video helpful and you'd like to support the channel, then throwing in a like or subscribing is always a huge help. If you're looking for further ways to support, then I do have a Patreon set up, and that's going to help me keep managing to do these videos for a long time to come, which is going to help more people make cool things. And that's awesome, because that's what this is all about, is helping more people make more cool things. And that is all. Thank you.